Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, July 19th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this Wednesday. On today's episode, we will dig into a very big night of run production on Tuesday and discuss whether or not there might be a sign of things to come, as a heat wave has pretty much covered most of the country. And as we know, warm weather makes the ball fly. The trade tips that we did not discuss on the Tuesday episode will be a big part of this episode. How do you get deals done? What actually moves things along and makes you a better trader? And we got lots of mailbag questions. A good question about Corbin Carroll's shoulder and his long-term health. A dynasty catcher question because of changes at that position with all the young talent coming in. We got a really fun pitch question about a Pirates reliever. So tons of ground to cover today. How's it going for you on this Wednesday?
It is a crazy day. My broken phone needs to be fixed today. It's long run day and it's already super hot. I need to run as soon as this podcast is over. It's one of those days, but it's hump day. So just get all that stuff done and it's free sailing from there.
Yeah, the heat is a problem everywhere, but it's good if you like run production. As we saw on Tuesday, this was a stat I saw on MLB Central this morning. I actually get MLB Network at my house now. I have it available, so I can watch their shows.
And I lost it. There can only be one MLB Network between the two of us.
I think as long as one of us watches it, we'll get all the good things. So there were two things I learned from the show. One, Lauren Shahadi DoorDashed a tea, and it cost her $32, which I thought was, whoa. I've DoorDashed donuts and things.
The donut DoorDash guy.
She passed me. She's taken the crown from me as the DoorDash champion. And the other thing I learned was that there were 12 teams that finished the day with run totals in double digits, and that set the MLB record within the modern era. That's since 1900. But according to Elias, the all-time mark was actually 13 teams doing it back on July 4th, 1894. So I think that was America's 198th birthday or so. I think that math might be a little off, but the teams were very different. The game was very different.
I'm no John Thorne, but I'm pretty sure back then, you could like sort of tell the pitcher where you wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was sort of more like akin to softball, and I don't mean like women's, D1 softball. I'm talking about
that stuff that's hard to hit.
More like beer league softball, where just put it right. I like it high.
Chuck and duck.
Yeah,
Chuck and duck, where they have to throw you strikes, and the pitcher sometimes will ask you, "Where do you want it?" It's like, that's fun.
It's a modern record, and it's related to climate change. It's definitely that's something that's on there, and I remember I got this study came across my desk, in April. This is a study in the American Meteorological Society, the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. And it was a study that looked at how many home runs in the past could be attributed to global warming. And then how many home runs, how that will grow in the future. And it looked over 60 years of baseball data with daily temperatures, and they found that the thinning and the warming of the air had already accounted for 1% of the home runs from 2010 to 2019, and they thought that 1% would grow to 10%. By 2100. Well, that's pretty far away, but it does point to the fact that warm air, the ball travels better in warm air. And I think one of the most counterintuitive things that has come up a bunch in my discussions of the Petco park factor situation and just discussions with people in general, the ball flies better in humid air. And I know that when you feel the subjective feel of humidity is wet and soggy and thick, right? Like you're walking through like water, like, just sludge almost, like if there's a sludge of air, that's how humidity feels. Like in Atlanta, I grew up in Atlanta, like Atlanta in August feels like you're walking through sludge. You know what I mean? That's a human interaction with it. It has to do with just, you're trying to sweat and what it's like. The ball's interaction is water molecules are lighter than air molecules, just on the sort of on the smallest level, on the atomic level, they're lighter. And so the more water molecules are in the air, the more there are lighter molecules in the air for the ball to sort of pass through. And so you may think it's a super muggy day, the ball's not going to travel far. In fact, the truth of the matter is the muggiest, warmest days. Oh, Atlanta on July 19th. Did you watch that game? That game was nutty.
The game was all over the place.
Oh my God. Just homer after homer after just, I mean, it interacted. There is an interaction with the current rules, I think. And this is the interaction, I think. I've seen some evidence that, there are some injuries that are mounting. So we covered the pitch clock and injuries, and there was a big spike at the beginning of the season. There was a big disagreement about whether or not that spike had to do with the pitch clock or not. I tend to think it kind of did, because we had a whole month called spring training of people trying to get used to the pitch clock. And I think that first wave was people being like, oops, that was, I'm not used to that, and getting hurt. Then things have normalized, and it looks more like a normal season since then. But now we may have a second spike where there's the accrual of fatigue over the season, which is going to be higher than in past seasons because of the pitch clock. So if we start having more injuries again, and sort of more than usual July, August injuries, you're going to have a thinning of the rosters, a thinning of the pitching staffs. And so that game in Atlanta, who started it? Did Elder start and get whooped?
It was Elder against Zach Davies, I believe.
So what was Elder in the Atlanta rotation to start the year? Like a afterthought. 8th?
7 or 8, yeah.
So you're already on your 8th starter, and Davies was maybe 5th or 6th, but he's up or down. He has good seasons, he has bad seasons. This was not a good pitching matchup. It's one that I would have taken the over on. And then it just went south after that, because they didn't even know whether to use their good relievers or their bad relievers. Because it's the 3rd inning and it's like 8-7. Well, are we already going to go into the Iglesias, the A plan, or are we in the C plan, the B plan? What plan are we on? So like Michael Tonkin is out there, it's just like it just devolved. But even I guess near the end, some of the good pitchers got hit too. Iglesias got beat up, and I mean the end result 16-13 that's a football score. So. And it wasn't the only one. I watched the end of the Giants Reds game. That was nutty. There was just, Wilmer Flores hit 2 homers. I'm not saying Wilmer Flores is bad, but like, a 2-homer night for him. He got interviewed afterwards. Like, he was the star of the game. And so I don't know. I think that this is something that I think we have to think about as fantasy baseball players. But I think baseball as a league has to think about that, because they're obviously trying to manage the interaction of homers and strikeouts, offense and pitching. And they can't come too hard down on the side of pitching and make it so hard to be a pitcher that as the weather warms and these home runs start flying, we start, 16-13, 12-11 becomes the norm. I do think that fans, I mean, it's kind of fun in the moment, but do you think that fans would adjust and just be fine with a game where it was like 12-11 every night?
No, because that turns every team in the league into the Rockies from a day-to-day perspective. And
yeah, it devalues, like if there are too many home runs, it devalues the homer, right? And if there are too many runs, it devalues scoring a run.
Yeah, and the league's corrective actions, this conversation does kind of have two sides. It's like, what does Major League Baseball do about this? The planet's getting hotter. I don't think that's... some people disagree with that. That's what's happening. Mm-hmm. The corrective actions for Major League Baseball are doing things like pushing fences back, right? Making it harder to hit home runs, which does probably put more balls in play. As we know, you make the outfield bigger, there's more space for the ball to land. That's starting to
grow on me. Honestly, there's a lot of people talking about this, and it's starting to grow on me.
So that's an easy thing to do, relatively speaking. More stadiums with roofs for climate control. That's another corrective action. Pretty costly, not always easy to do.
And even the wall thing is semi-costly.
Yeah, that costs something, but at least compared to putting a roof on a stadium,
yeah, that's
a little more affordable. And then you could start messing with the mound, doing other things. We've talked about that as having a lot of unintended negative consequences where pitch movement profiles are completely different in the types of things that pitchers can do. If you move the mound back, that could lead to a whole other set of problems. And then, you look at the fantasy implications of this. I think the biggest one is something people have talked about for several years. We know that the summer months are the more offensively charged months. It's harder to stream pitchers
August,
now. Yeah, it's harder to stream pitchers now than it is back in April and May when the weather's a lot cooler. So part of that might be saying, you know what, I'm going to go a little heavier with starters over relievers in the first couple months of the season, and then I'm going to shift from a 7-2 split, starters versus relievers, to 6-3 or something like that. There's some actions like that you can take along the way.
If you are in leagues with pitching caps, I think that's a really good way to do it because we see 30-40% of saves come off the wire anyway. So you go into the season and you just say, hey, I'm just going to draft 2 relievers that I think are good. Maybe a little bit higher than some, maybe, on the higher end, maybe some, I think that are really good relievers. And then I'm not going to really bother with the dart throws at the end as much. And I'd rather have a bunch of starting pitchers on my roster to begin the season. And, you're talking about 7-2, you have to consider the bench too. So if you have like a 5-man bench, like if 3 of those are pitchers, I'm talking about going to the season with 10 starting pitchers and 2 relievers.
Right. And then you're rotating from those bench options to max out the 2 start weeks and just cranking in as much volume as you possibly can.
And then you pick up a closer off the wire, and then you're you're down to 9-3. I do think that works. It's a little harder in leagues where there is no like pitching cap. Like for example, right now in my main, we have pushed our way to the middle of the pack. And we're punting ERA at this point. So I guess we're okay with whatever, like we're punting ERA at this point because we got in such a hole there. And the only thing we could do was work hard at strikeouts. But like we threw DeSclafani.
You absorbed that one, huh?
Well, we had a choice between Michael Grove at Baltimore and DeSclafani with DeSclafani, had 2 defined starts. When you're in a money league, I think one thing that I think that people eschew too much or don't think about enough is if you're in a money league, third place pays. And if third place pays, and you can look at your standings and say, "Man, I'm not going anywhere here," and you can make that decision earlier and just be like, "Okay, I'm probably not going to win this league by punting 2 categories. It's just going to be hard. There's going to be somebody who's going to be good across the board. That guy look at his team. It's ridiculous. But if I punt 2 categories, I might do third and I still get my money back, or I'm in the money. That's worth doing, especially the bigger the money payout is. And I would honestly, I think that's true for me in dynasty leagues too. I think too often people have a team that's like a 4th place team and are ready to blow that up. And I'm like, and Devil Rejects, we're up to 4th. And I'm like, 3rd is good. It's in the money, so let's just keep at it. I'm not saying we're going to trade Junior Caminero away, but we're not necessarily also going to trade away all our veterans and rebuild.
What's strange about days like Tuesday and bad pitching performances? I mean, DeSclafani's a good one to call out here because it could have been worse. He went 2, he gave up 4 earned runs, gave up 4 hits, didn't walk anybody, struck out 5. At least they got him.
We got him. Ks.
You got Ks. You're punting ERA anyway in your specific case.
Yeah.
But at least they got him out of the game.
Well, he didn't before Elder, they let that guy rot, dude.
Yeah. Sometimes it's even worse depending on how teams manage their bullpens, who they have available fresh. I think maybe there are some teams that have more depth, more safety nets in place to avoid the worst of the worst blowups. I don't know how actionable that is, but compared to other blowups, that wasn't that bad.
My son asked me an interesting question. He said, "Who's the best player on the Giants?"
He's already messing with you. He's a little young to mess with you like that.
I said, that is a really interesting question.
Hey, how did you answer it?
I said, they're all the same.
That had to lead to more questions.
It did. We had a good conversation. It was a fun conversation. One of those walks home from school. But yeah, I mean, yeah. How do you identify teams that are like that? I think it's sometimes it's a sniff test. Who has better pitching depth, the Giants or the D-backs? Without looking.
Oh, the Giants do. That's no question.
So who's more likely to get a 10 spot hung on them, Zach Davies or Ross Stripling?
Yeah, it's got to be Davies.
Yeah. So I mean, I think some of it is just you can just sort of appraise it, but yeah, I mean, in general, what else can you do to be prepared for this? I don't know. We're not that great still at projecting home run rates for pitchers, and that's really what we're talking about right now in July and August I think there's going to be some good pitchers that get blown up. Brian Wu, after I gave him so much love, and I had forgotten about the innings thing. I was doing a true talent ranking. We did a true talent ranking of Brian Wu, Andrew Abbott, and Grayson Rodriguez before his start. Where would you have that? You go back in the time machine on Monday.
Rodriguez, Abbott, and Wu.
Yeah.
Grayson clearly at the top. I think I like Wu more than Abbott. Something just isn't quite right for me with Abbott, and maybe a lot of it's the home park.
Well,
even though he's been getting good results. I saw
also the fastball is exactly average shape, and I'm getting the Elder vibes where I'm like, I don't understand this, and I don't think it's going to keep going.
I think hanging out with you as much as I do has also shaped my opinion of Andrew Abbott in significant ways. So yeah, I'll admit.
But you were higher on Wu than I was when he first came up. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of come around, and I was thinking about pushing Wu ahead of Grayson. Now, there's an innings component, yes, and I came up on Twitter, and I'm like, I apologize. Wu is coming up on his innings, so if we're talking about this year, the rest of the year, it's clearly Grayson, and might actually be Abbott over Wu because Wu could get shut down at any time. But in any case, Wu got blown up. It wasn't all just bad pitchers, right?
It wasn't all bad pitchers. I think Tarek Skubal.
By the Royals.
Yeah, that's not supposed to happen. It was bad all around. I mean, there were plenty of poor performances, though. Alek Manoah, after looking pretty good against the Tigers, still doesn't look right.
I wasn't in on that one when he came back up for auction.
Yeah, so it was a handful of different guys. I thought too, part of the explanation for what happened on Tuesday was coming out of the All-Star break. That was the 5th game day, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3.
So it was all the 5th starters
it was more 5th starters, but it wasn't all 5th starters because there were guys that pitched in the All-Star game and then resetting schedules. I mean, I think the Mets White Sox matchup was Giolito versus Carrasco. That game finished 11-10. So it wasn't all just the perfect storm of the bad pitchers all showed up and it was hot. It was a bunch of different factors.
I would say that most of the bad scores were in hitters' parks, right?
Let's see. Great American Ballpark,
Citi Braves Field is a hitter's park.
Truist, Wrigley.
I mean,
Kauffman.
Wrigley.
It was a mix.
With Wrigley, it's all about the weather and the. Was that a day game at Wrigley?
Day game. I don't remember what time that game was on Tuesday offhand. I think
Tigers Royals.
I think it was a night game.
Tigers Royals was in Kansas City. That's
one of the places that you're seeing the more elevated temps right now too.
And the Mets game was at home, was not in Chicago.
Yeah, it was a mix of ballparks. It wasn't just the hitter-friendly places.
I bet you a lot of people looked at Carrasco Giolito and liked that matchup and thought it would be like a 3-2 game.
Yep, I think so. Let's move on. Let's talk about some trade tips. What actually helps you get deals done? I know you make a lot of trades because you send me questions and ideas and, hey, what do you think about trying this deal, or should I take this back? Like, we kind of go back and forth. It's nice to have someone to bounce ideas off of, because mostly I think you want to know that you're not overpaying when you make a trade. That's a common thread. We all have that. Like, you want to make a good offer, but you don't want to make the best, most friendliest offer of all time if you are into dealing. So the longer you've done this, what have you found actually kind of speeds things up to the point of actually getting a deal from a few emails or texts back and forth to a deal that actually gets done?
I don't know, man. It's hard. I almost put the F word in there. It's hard, dude. It's so hard. I find it is easier if you open up a line of communication that is not through the app itself.
Yeah, those are no good.
I do have a Discord channel for my oldest league. I should probably get back in there because just opening up a conversation, I think, is better than just starting off with the trade offer. Because in a conversation, you can kind of characterize your approach. And of course, you want to personalize that approach to the person you're talking about. So you want to look at their team, you want to look at their standings, you want to look at where they are, you want to look at their players, who's hurt, you want to look at where they are, in terms of youth, if it's a dynasty league, you want to look at all that. And you want to be like, okay, and you don't have to necessarily say it in your head or say it out loud to the other person, but in your head, you want to be like, I think this person could use an MI, and I have Ketel Marte, who's 29 years old, and is playing really well, but I'm just not sure that long-term he's a great, dynasty guy. It's 12 team. I think I want to sell Ketel Marte, and I think he wants an MI. So you say to him, you open up a line of communication. You say, well, I'm not winning this year. I've got a bunch of veterans. Do you see any mix? Do you see any possible matches? And then you throw Ketel Marte in a list of some other guys, and you hope that they sort of bite at Ketel Marte. But if they don't, you can still continue the conversation. And then all of a sudden you're trading somebody else for something, but you hadn't thought of it ahead of time, but they thought of it. And that makes it more likely for it to happen, So open up a line of communication that's not in the platform. Because if I just send Ketel Marte and they just don't like Ketel Marte, they're not necessarily going to go through the rest of my roster and do all the work that I did in reverse. And they're just going to be like, nope, done. And then you're like, and then you have to it's like a job application. You have to fall in love with another trade. You have to come up with a whole nother thing, fall in love with it, send it, get rejected. Start it all over again.
Yeah, the job application thing is a pretty good analogy. The doing your homework part is really looking at the categorical needs of that other team, thinking about what just happened to their roster, if an injury took place. Doing the homework goes a long way. That's sort of the main takeaway that I've had is no matter who you're trading with and no matter what method of communication you like, just knowing what the other person involved might actually need gives you a much better chance of reaching a conclusion. I think the thing I see people do in my leagues that makes me kind of chuckle every time I see it is the trade block button. They go to the trade block and they say, looking for this, inquire within. And it's like, well, okay, that can start the dialogue, but that's just not doing any of the work. That's just saying, come to me with your best offer. And then usually I have found people that operate that way are really hard to deal with because they want to win a trade that they're not even willing to do homework for. So that tends to be a dead end sort of thing. But I've seen everything, man. I've seen people not look at rosters and just offer trades. You'll have a great first baseman, a great corner, and a UT that's also a corner. And the player you get offered just out of nowhere is another corner. And you're kind of like, I don't even have room to play that player. Mm-hmm. So no, we can't make that sort of trade. So the early prep work is really important. And I think looking at, instead of trying to sell someone else on what they need, which is another kind of no for me. Like, don't tell me how the trade helps me. Assume that I can understand how the trade would help me if it's a good trade.
Or ask me what my needs are.
Yeah, you can ask. If it's a keeper league or a dynasty league, I think it's fine to ask, are you prioritizing picks right now? Are you prioritizing minor leaguers? Are you prioritizing young major leaguers? I think those kinds of questions are totally fine because the value in a long-term league comes from a lot of different places. And each person has a different sense of how important each of those elements might be. Some people value draft picks a lot more than others. You don't want to miss that just because you didn't take the time to ask. And that's something that's a little harder to know if you haven't already made a trade with that person in the past. So that'd be a big one too, is like finding out some preferences as far as what types of players someone would want back, especially if we're talking about those long-term formats.
Yeah, and I think, part of what we're saying underneath this is, put yourself in their shoes. I mean, that's the hardest part. And that's when you do the work, but the work also has to be on your end, because I'm sort of coming to realize in this league that maybe nobody wants Ketel Marte. And after a while, people get annoyed. Oh, another Ketel Marte offer. Even if I'm like, I'm pretty sure you could use a second baseman and you're in the playoffs and I'm not, but they just don't want the older player. So that's great. Then you have to turn up the pain meter on your side. And you have to go past Ketel Marte, who you could easily trade for whatever, and you have to go to the next player. And sometimes you have to, if you want to get what you want, you have to go 2 or 3 players past that first player. That's so easy to trade. Like this league that I'm talking about, I would really like to rebuild, and no one is helping me. I started with, trying to shop Rowdy Tellez when he was playing better, I forget who else. Max Muncy. This is the league that I was trying to shop Max Muncy. And I was getting no offers. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to move on from Max Muncy to Ketel Marte. Nothing's biting. So I'm just going to have to move up the pain meter. And I think next on the pain meter is maybe Cody Bellinger. The other thing that's interesting is first place has a stacked ass team, and they lost Mike Trout. I could go to that team with Cody Bellinger and probably get a trade done. Now I'm making the stacked team even more stacked.
You're hurting yourself for future deals because you're taking away buyers.
Yes. And I prefer to start with second and third and fourth place.
Yep.
Just because there are also political, especially in long-term dynasty leagues where you know each other, there are political aspects to trades. I could make that trade with first place, and it could be good for me, and it maybe is the best thing to do, and damn whatever. But what if it makes people less likely to re-up in the league next year? Or what if the people look at first place and they're like, this league is toast. Like, look at that guy's team or whatever. You know what I mean? There are these sort of secondary aspects. I'm not saying don't do the trade, because people might be mad. But there are sort of long-term league health aspects that I do think about sometimes, just because this is one of my longest leagues. This is, I've been the co-commissioner, we're talking about 13, 14 years now on this team. So, why make first place more stacked just so I can get something for Cody Bellinger when Cody Bellinger's not that old himself?
Yeah, I guess real quick, just since you brought up Bellinger, how much are you buying into it now that we're more than a half season through this sort of renaissance to his career? The K rate has stayed down 17.7%. That's the strikeout rate we saw from him back when he was MVP Bellinger. Like, that was something he's done before. We got the power, we've got the speed, the walks are still there. The one thing that's a little weird, and it was weird when we first talked about it maybe 6 weeks ago, the quality of the contact has not come back. So how much of a problem is that for a guy that, if he were healthy to this point, would be on a pace for about a 30-30 season or close to it?
It's bizarre. I mean, this is the worst barrel rate of his career, and the max CV has never gone back to pre-shoulder injury days. He's not hitting the ball as hard. I tend to think that strikeout rate is nice, and the fact that he's still stealing bases is nice, but I might consider some offers. I might go out there and offer him at 28. Like, what would you project him for next year? 29 years old, with that quality of contact, the up and down K weight. I think you would project him for at least a 20, 21, 22, somewhere around league average strikeout rate, somewhere around league average power.
So that would give him the rest of the season projections are probably a good guide here. The bat X
close to that.
BATX has 251, 318, 445. That's not a slash line for a player you'd get excited about unless you believe that the power speed combo, it comes down to the speed. If he continues to run and is efficient the way he has been, league average power over a full season for a guy that plays center field, are we talking 18 to 20 homers?
I mean, I think that's part of the package is like if the center field defense is slipping, he's 5% better than the average is the projection. And 5% better than the average for a center fielder is fine. For a first baseman, it's not. Right now, he's the 56th best defender by outs above average, right there with Trent Grisham. So looks like he has a couple more years still at center.
Yeah, 79th percentile for outs above average, 79th percentile for arm strength, sprint speed's the 75th percentile. It looks like the other thing, if you look at the spray chart too.
For a rebuilder, though, it makes sense to trade him because he actually has value.
You don't want to get caught waiting too long. Yeah.
It's not a rental. I'm saying you can have this guy for 3 years, 4 years, 2020.
What are you expecting for a return?
I mean, I'm going to need some quantity. And this is why major league teams do it too. Not only is it covering your ass, quantity with young players, because you in these trade deadline deals, you want to have quantity because you want to be like, oh, I know we traded away this guy, but this one guy out of the three turned out, and that's everything. So there is a bit of a cover your ass aspect to it, but there's also the opportunity to have 2 or 3 good players for one. It's a 12 team without CI and MI. So really what I want is one young player that could be better than Bellinger and some elite prospects.
Elite prospects. So you're getting down to like the 15 to 25 range because you're probably not getting Holiday or Churio. You're not getting guys like that back for Bellinger, I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
You're probably looking more at maybe Jason Dominguez. We talked about a bit yesterday. Maybe Curtis Mead, Colt Keith, guys like that.
Ooh,
Drew Gilbert.
I would take Colt Keith if the young major leaguer was good.
And I'm working off of James Anderson's list over at RotoWire. So yeah, guys that are kind of in the back of the top 25 are probably your realistic targets for the best prospect you get back. And then you have to make sure if you get 2, maybe 3 other players back, probably 2. I think you're getting 3 total players back, and you could throw some stuff in to balance it out along with Bellinger, of course.
Yeah, I can throw anything out. I mean, I can throw all my old starters.
Throw Max Muncy in there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you get a free Max Muncy. Yeah.
But that's part of the other trade tip thing that I would work in is that the bundling of players sometimes works really well. It can work well on both sides. If you have players that you've tried to shop individually and you're just not getting a lot of interest, sometimes those players are enough to put a deal over the top. You kind of realize, the league doesn't value this player that much, but that player is enough to bridge the gap from no, I don't think I like this to, yeah, okay, that's fair. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked. And I think that's exactly what Muncy would be in a 12-team league right now.
Yeah, and don't be afraid. I mean, it is, don't send your flotsam and jetsam for, one player. In this case, I'm building a trade around somebody I didn't really want to trade, Cody Bellinger. So I think that's a good starting spot. Now you're throwing Max Muncy on somebody you didn't want to trade. Now that's got some good value. Like if I just take Max Muncy and add him to Ketel Marte and go back to everybody, they'll see that coming a mile away. Oh, so I said no to Muncy and said no to Ketel Marte. Oh, I'm going to say no to Max Muncy and Ketel Marte.
I would have bundled them together. Maybe that'll make it more enticing.
Yeah, so I think just being willing to get to some sort of pain point for yourself is actually one of the biggest things. If you're making a deal where there's just absolutely no pain for you, then I don't know. Then you're maybe just ripping them off.
Well, I think that going back to your point about the trade aspect of things being political, if you rip people off, they're not going to deal with you in the future. Like if you clearly win trades and offer garbage, you can't go back to that well, or you lose friendships over it. In the worst case scenario, you don't want that to happen either. So you have to be mindful of those possible outcomes. Speaking of trades, we had a mailbag question about a possible trade. So Corbin Carroll in long-term leagues is extra complicated right now because he looks like a superstar who would go easily in the first round, probably going to go early first round for redrafts in 2024, as long as his shoulder is healthy. So we had a question from Chris, who is horrified at the shoulder situation. We saw 2 instances now in which Carroll took a swing,
grabbed the shoulder,
had to leave. He talked about thinking his season was over and feeling some numbness in his hand after that.
No way. I didn't know all that.
That's what he said afterwards, but seems to be okay coming out of the All-Star break. So Chris has an opportunity in a Dynasty league where he just took Carroll as the 12th overall pick to trade Carroll and get back Julio Rodriguez plus a first rounder in the first-year player draft coming up in the winter or the spring. So Chris wants to know, do I have to do this? I really wanted to have Carroll on my roster for years to come, but this feels like a pretty safe way to avoid a catastrophe.
We just talked about Cody Bellinger.
And the impact of that shoulder injury is
you can see it
pretty
clearly.
Yeah.
You can see it clearly in Cody Bellinger's career. He's not the person he was in 2019. Oh, man. But just look at that season from Cody Bellinger. Carroll couldn't even do better than that, man.
He runs more, so yeah.
I mean, he could have like a 40-40 season.
Right. Corbin Carroll has, Ronald Acuna type ceilings.
And honestly, in that D-backs Braves game, I got a real kind of like leadership vibe from Carroll. Like, didn't he try to steal home and got caught?
I didn't see that.
I was like sort of half watching. He got thrown out at home somehow. Maybe he went on a grounder or something, but he was like stealing bases, and he had a really good game in a game where he had to have a really good game. And I don't know, I just got this vibe that like this is a young superstar that's like, this is my team, and I'm going up against Acuna, and I'm gonna do all the stuff he does, and you know what I mean? Like that's the vibe I was getting from that game. Even when he made a mistake, I was like, I kind of liked that mistake because he was just like, and they scored again after it, and they won the game. So I don't know exactly what happened in that play, so I don't want to mischaracterize it. But just generally, the vibe I was getting was like, this is a superstar coming in his own, and just does not think he doesn't belong. Has no questions about that, and is actually out here just trying to do every single thing he can do for his team to win. I get that same vibe from Rodriguez, but Rodriguez has an actual flaw, maybe. That strikeout rate.
Yeah, I think that's
strikeout rate plus the chase rate a little bit.
He's lived at 25% since debuting last year, so we're closing in on 1,000 career plate appearances.
Does not have the elite speed either.
Not Carroll level speed, but he's 47 for 59 so far as a base stealer in a season and a third ish.
Yeah, remember when like late last season he just stopped stealing for a while?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the approach, the way that Julio Rodriguez chases is one of those things that you just wonder.
Batted ball quality is a little bit better.
Right. It's picking nits in a great player. I think this is a very fair trade offer. This is one of those offers. This is one you look at and you say, I think I like that trade. And you could make it and say, oh, I kind of want to trade back. That means it's fair. It's balanced on both sides. I think it's pretty nice to get a first rounder on top of Julio, because if you think about the days, like the immediate aftermath of that Carroll injury, everybody would have wanted more information. Everybody wanted to wait and see. And I think I still look at that as a potential long-term problem.
Especially if it's happened twice in the season.
I think I would take it. I don't think you have to take it, but I think I'm the kind of person that would want to mitigate that risk.
More risk averse.
And would take Julio, because I think you're still getting a guy with a tremendous ceiling.
I mean, if you were starting a Dynasty league from scratch, they would both go in the first round.
Right. So you're getting the guy that goes a few picks later plus a first-round pick. And if you were doing this exercise 4 months ago, I think you would have found that everybody would have taken Julio
to get Julio.
Yes, it flipped just based on a few months, and they're so young that they could be 1-2 on the board for a few years. They both have that sort of ceiling.
Yeah, maybe. I think you could be right. I think to make this more helpful for anybody who's beyond this is just that that idea of making something so close that you're not sure. That's what I'm talking about with the pain point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
This wouldn't be worth discussing if it was a lopsided trade, then it wouldn't be worth discussing. So this is an example of somebody. There's pain here. The pain is giving up Corbin Carroll's possible 40-40 season. The benefit is avoiding the risk of a Bellinger type, injury, a catastrophic decline in power somehow. A guy who ends up being more of a 15 to 20 homer hitting guy who still steals 30 bases, while getting a guy who probably still has a 30-30 season in his future.
Yeah. I think it's a fun trade, and I think what it comes back to is just a broader conversation of your risk tolerance in long-term leagues. And when I think an opportunity like this comes along, I think it's okay to swap out of the risky situation. There's a short list of players that I'd be willing to trade. To trade Corbin Carroll for. Julio's on that list, especially with the added benefit of that pick. So thanks a lot for that question, Chris. Alex wanted to know, with the arrival of a lot of young catchers in the league, and there's a few more certainly coming through the system right now, what's the dynasty value of the veteran catchers like JT Realmuto and Salvador Pérez? This particular league's a 16-team league. It happens to be points, but we'll make it just a broader conversation. Of course, you got guys like Cal Raleigh, Keibert Ruiz, you got Bo Naylor, MJ Melendez, Shea Langoliers, and Tyler Soderstrom. So this is a position, Endy Rodriguez, Henry Davis, like a lot of young talent has come in recently. Does this start to impact the value of those older guys like Realmuto and Sal, and you could throw Wilson Contreras in there as well, given the number of viable alternatives and given how tough it is to continue producing at this position as you move past the wrong side of 30?
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, the best time to trade and I say unfortunately because I am a JT Realmuto owner in our Devil's Rejects. He's our catcher. I mean, he's not going to go in the tank, and with the speed, I actually think he's maybe a little bit better of a long-term bet than somebody like Sal Perez, who's kind of your prototypical masher. But I think the right time to trade those guys is 30. It's a position that puts toll on your body. Catchers debut later, peak later, and end their careers earlier. And I don't know if that last bit I'm not as sure of, but I also know that I Hall of Fame vote. And when we Hall of Fame vote, catchers in a separate category as opposed to how many hits we want them to have. 3,000 is a number you want a normal player. If you want someone if you're going to vote somebody into the Hall based on their hit total, 3,000 is still a number, right? That's still the number people realize. For catchers, you just want them to get to 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not even getting there anymore because Buster Posey did not make it to 2,000. I'm still going to vote for him to the Hall of Fame. But you got a guy there than Buster Posey who was great and then, gone early. Maybe that's just a singular event, but it's also just, I think, points the needle to Buster Posey's 36 now.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been out of the league for 3 years. So I don't know. I would point to Buster Posey as being actually somewhat instructive, even though he is a singular event. It tells me that some of these guys will make enough money and their knees will hurt enough and they'll just stop playing.
Posey came back for 2021 because he's been out. This is the second year that he hasn't played, but
right.
The point stands. I mean, this is a guy that I think if he had DH'd or played first base, he could still offer plenty as a hitter. He had something left in the tank and had other things in life that mattered more and decided to go do that, and that's fine.
Things, yeah.
totally understandable. I don't think the arrival of the young catchers hurts the value of the elite catchers for me, because I don't value them necessarily like entirely on the
rest
scarcity.
Of the question is that, the supply of young players.
And I think part of it is it's what you were saying, that it doesn't always happen quickly for catchers at the plate. You have guys that can become above average offensive players, and they're not there yet. We talked about MJ Melendez as someone that made sense as a midseason buy low. His past calendar year numbers are really solid. 16 homers, 71 runs, 70 RBIs, 7 steals with a 215 average. It's an 84 WRC plus. I would bet that the next calendar year from MJ Melendez is a lot better than that because of the quality of contact that he makes. So you could see guys like that starting to click in year 2, year 3, and that makes the position deeper. But the difference for me is JT Realmuto, he's still top 5 at the position in homers over the past calendar year. You mentioned the speed, 19 steals during that span. You're getting something that no one else at the position can really do now that Dalton Varsho has lost catcher eligibility in most leagues. And he does it while playing a lot more than most. So you get great counting stats. Oh, and he hits for average. A lot of catchers don't do. So I think JT Realmuto is kind of a special player that people maybe don't necessarily appreciate outside of fantasy as much as they should. I think in the fantasy community, he gets plenty of love, and it's deserved. I think he's going to age reasonably well for the position because he's athletically very different for that sort of position. But that cumulative wear and tear, it's coming for him. He's at that point. This is probably the beginning of hopefully a slow and graceful decline. So I would be more focused on that.
He's at a 102 WRC plus right now, and he's projected by the Bat X for 118 the rest of the year. So let's say next year you project him for, you have to put some aging in there. You project him for 110 WRC plus next year. And let's say he does that. That's still, he has alternated good years and bad years. If you look, he was 127, 107, 124, 108, 128, 102. So next year he's going to alternate back to the good year, if that's
that's how it works.
But he'll be more like a 118, and then the next year in 2025 he might be a 100 or 98 WRC plus. So I think that just the bad years are going to get a little bit worse, and maybe you want to wait till next year to trade him if there's better, or you wait till the end of this season where the ball's flying better. For some reason, Philadelphia is playing like a pitcher's park in the 1-year park factors. It's very strange. I don't know why. And balls, even if you look at the StatCast park factors, they're based on launch angle and exit velocity. Balls are just not doing as well in Philadelphia as they were before. There is a new scoreboard that's 70% larger. Usually that would increase offense, from what I understand from weather applied metrics and Ken Arneson and how wind works. But maybe in this case, it's actually blocking some wind that used to help the batters. In any case, I would assume that with the weather rising, Philadelphia is going to play more like a hitter's park. We're going to have, I think, in the next week, a 11-10 game in Philadelphia. So, and I think Realmuto will hit 2 dingers in one of these games. So, some of this is, he's going to get right, but I would consider trading him now just because of what I was saying about pain points. You don't trade JT Realmuto at 35 years old for, the 150th best prospect because you can't get any better. You trade him at 32 when he's still stealing bases and looks like he's going to give the other team value for 3 years for a really good prospect or actually a young player.
Yeah, so I guess the bigger question here is, what does it take to actually get him, or what do you get if you're trading him away? And I think the balance in many situations is that people will say, this is a guy who's going to be 33 next March. I'm worried the decline is here. So I would actually look at JT Realmuto in Dynasty and Keeper Leagues as someone I'm more likely to trade for right now than to trade away. Even though the consensus would be that this is the beginning of decline. And they might be right, but I think I think that's priced in. I think you're not necessarily giving up an elite prospect anymore to get JT Realmuto. And that's part of why I think there's some appeal to actually getting him right now, when most people would say, yes, I want to get younger at the position. And there are plenty of options to do that, right? I mean, but in a Keeper or Dynasty League, if you were trading even within the catcher pool, you're not getting Adley Rutschman for JT Realmuto today. That's off the table.
Could you get Keibert Ruiz and an extra piece?
Yeah, and I don't think I would do it. I think I'd rather just see what happens with JT and then even if I get caught just having to replace him off the waiver wire eventually, that's probably better than what I'm getting back in the return.
Yeah.
Sal's a different case. He's DHing a lot more now.
And Sal's already not going to, he's not going to bounce back and get you much more in the future. Like Sal's already like, just if somebody has interest, trade him. If you're rebuilding, he's not going to be part of your future.
Yeah, he's a year older. We're not seeing some of the peak barrel rates, even though we're seeing better stuff now, even at age 32 and 33 than we saw for most of his late 20s.
I think I would also, like, if I was training with Sal Perez, I wouldn't prioritize getting a catcher back. The one thing that I do in most leagues is just figure it out at catcher. I don't want the very worst. So I'm not saying punt catcher. I'm just saying figure it out. Just grab somebody in that middle bit. That's not the very worst catchers are the very worst offensive players in baseball. So you don't want them on your fantasy team. I'm not a $1 catcher guy. I'm not into that. Those are the worst players in fantasy sports. I think in fantasy sports, like maybe worse than kickers, and what I mean. Like I think the $1 catcher is just not a good deal. But like Keibert Ruiz is, I like them, and Keibert Ruiz himself is turning it around. I think.
Maybe finally delivering on some of that potential. Finally, hasn't been that long.
Abrams. Keibert Ruiz.
That could be. You could make that your guy. That's fine. Thanks a lot for that question, Alex. Got a question from Josh. Josh wants to know. We've often mentioned that stuff is stickier than command year over year. His question is whether there's an in-season factor at play. When a command first guy is having a great year, Eflin and Elder jump to mind this year. Can we expect that command to continue for the rest of the season? In other words, is location plus more predictive in season than it is year over year?
Yes, it is. And we have found that we found value in location plus in season. I would say season to season, it actually is fairly sticky for the elite guys. So you see George Kirby leading the league in location plus. He is likely to be in the top 5 again next year. Aaron Nola, second, has had a great location plus number his whole career. Zach Eflin has also had a great location plus every year, and he has a 97 stuff plus. So that's actually a decent combo to bet on year to year. The types that I don't like betting on as much are guys where the stuff plus is so low. Miles Michaelis has had good stuff location plus his whole career. But I think he bounces around results wise because his stuff plus is not as good. 89 stuff plus. And you see it a little bit with Merrill Kelly, but already he has a 96 stuff plus. But Braxton Garrett has an 87 stuff plus and a 103 location plus. That's the kind of pitcher I will bet on in season, but I will not bet on season to season.
Yeah, I think that's a good application, though, based on how the location plus tends to work. Thanks a lot for that question, Josh. We had one more question for today. This one came from Brian. It was titled Dauri Moreta Slider. I've heard and seen it's weird. Any thoughts about this from Eno, and if it should actually be called a slider based off how he throws it, or how it should be based on the action of the ball? So the best way I could describe it, my non-Eno assessment was I watched it and I was like, oh, that's a gyro slider. And I watched it again. I was like, wait a minute. That's got like this airbender. Moreta's a righty. It tails away. It's arm side. It's arm side movement, which is really weird for a pitch that gets classified as a slider.
Yeah, it's really strange. It's a really strange pitch. It's not a screwball, because with a screwball you'll get more vertical differential and even more horizontal movement maybe. But it seems kind of like a screw slider. And at 85 miles an hour, it does have good velo. Just on its own, if it was a slider, 85 miles an hour is a bit of a benchmark for quality. But with that arm side movement, it's really strange. And a couple things come to mind. One thing that we are trying to do in Stuff Plus is find a way to boost unique pitches. So Alexis Diaz, Yannier Cano, and Dauri Moreta are on this list of people who throw a pitch that there is no comp. And in essence, Stuff Plus is comping shapes and velos and things, and trying to find other pitches like that, and then bringing back the results and being like, a pitch like this should get these types of results. That's it's dumbing it down, but that's sort of what the machine is doing. If there are no results, it just sort of assumes league average or worse. So that's what you get with Moretta. We are considering a little bit of a thing, a Bayesian boost. So what we would try to do is kind of spider out a little bit past, pitches that are actually that close to it, and be like, what are pitches that are kind of close to it? Or what are some change-ups? And in fact, slider versus changeup doesn't matter in the model. We'll just look for pitches like that, move like this. But are there some other ones that move a little bit like it? Are there, is there a way to sort of boost, somewhat similar pitches? Domingo Acevedo last year threw a backup slider and had good results on it, honestly. But how long did it last? And I did just speak to a major leaguer that he brought up Dory Moretta to me yesterday, and he was a pitcher, and we both were like, I don't know if it's going to last. Because at some point, if you also look at his mix as a group of pitches, all of his pitches have arm side movement. He has nothing that goes the other way. So if you're a hitter, you don't have to worry about things going in one direction. You can just start to keyhole its degrees of going in this direction, right? Then you can start to be like, okay, so now I'm just looking for a velocity band, because I know everything's moving towards me, if you're a righty. So I know everything's moving towards me. I'm going to look for things that are out over the plate a little bit. Why would I ever swing at anything in if they're all moving towards me?
I wonder if he'll end up with some reverse splits in the long run.
Yes, I think somebody like this would.
He throws that pitch 61.2% of the time. It's a ton of usage, but he's also got that four seamer and the changeup. And
even when you look, because Brooks has a different number.
Oh, what does Brooks have it as?
Brooks has, you know what? I have his all times. Let me see. Yeah, okay, 57%. But there are some similarities to the changeup, which is
it's so weird.
Yeah. But everything moves in, and think about this, like in Brooks notation, it's -4 on the slider horizontal, -7.7 on the changeup horizontal, and -6 on the four seam horizontal. So that's tight. Those are all moving in on you at about the same. It's not like one's -10 and one's -2. You know what I mean? These are all like fairly in that same range. So they're all moving in on you to some degree. And the only difference is the 95 stays up, the 85 stays middle, and the slider, the 84, goes down. And so, I think you would just keyhole that velo. That's why he's throwing the slider 57% of the time.
Yeah, working for now. We'll see if it continues to work for Dari Moretta. Good question, Brian. Thanks for writing in. He gives credit to Foolish Bailey for inspiring the email. So an assist on the email. I always like to see that. We are going to go on our way out the door. A reminder, you can get a subscription.
Now I have to run.
Sorry, man. You said you got to wrap it up, so I didn't want to run long. You got to get out there and
it's hot.
You got to go sweat it out, I guess. But $2 a month gets you a subscription to The Athletic at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. On Twitter, you can find Eno at Saris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. You can find the pod at Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.